Okay, this is Masters of Podcasting. My name is Conley.
I'm Melissa.
And today we're going to be talking about episode 10, Fallout.
This was a fraught episode, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had to get my nuclear drill suit out of storage for this one.
I hid under a table while I watched this episode, and then I put a plate on my windowsill.
Awesome.
Because of the intense fallout of this entire relationship. Ha ha ha. So, the thesis of this, or I guess the theme of this episode, as we kind of discussed it, was how does everyone react to a threat against the status quo of their life, whether, I guess, as it's expressed through the simulation, and then through reality as well.
Well, I would say you get people who fall into two camps. You either get the people who don't care at all, they have zero feelings about it, or, are in such denial that they are forcing themselves not to have feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have people on the other end who are just going out of their minds.
Yeah, it really tends to fall along. I would say, well, what do you think? Do people who act in denial, are they kind of floating through life? Does that make any sense?
Because really, I mean, the one who is most in denial is Austin, and I wouldn't characterize him as maybe floating through life, given that he walks through the hospital like he's in a haunted house, but...
Well, but he's been kind of, floating through life up until this point. He's been just sort of screwing whoever he wants without much consequence, and then he has, this woman that he does not remember suddenly confronting him, not directly, but indirectly, confronting him with the fact that now his actions have consequences.
Well, and it's funny because, he goes from one extreme to the other. The pendulum swings the other way, because when he's talking to Bill about it, the litany of reasons pouring out of his mouth just were cracking me up, because it's like, oh my God, my wife's father is an ex-cop, and he shows me his handgun collection every time I go over. I'm going to get dragged down to a basement and get murdered. Like, he's just picturing his life spiraling out of control and ending. And I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. Bill acts like everything is exactly the same. He, intends to go through his life. He is just not gonna brook any of this nonsense with the simulation. He does not plan on hiding underneath a desk. And that seems really arrogant at first, but then, he's pretty frosty in the clutch when he goes in to do the surgery. And I think if there were a genuine fallout situation, he would be the one going, no, we still need to do surgery. Like, we still need to keep under control. But ultimately, I think he does have his moment of breakdown halfway through the episode when he lashes out at Ethan. What's most important is that the fallout hasn't really happened for him yet. It's like he still thinks that he can go through his day acting pretty much as he usually does, an arrogant bow-tied jackass. And it doesn't really seem to hit him until very, very late when Gini up and quits on him.
It's like shock for him, because he's clearly, he knows what's happening on a logical level, because obviously, trying to make everybody go on as usual with the surgeries, and as far as his own personal situation. He knows Libby's pregnant. He knows how that happened. He's angry about it, but he's still functioning at the point where he's just trying to make everything, like you said, stay the same or go the same, minus one or two exceptions, meaning Gini and Ethan get frozen out. But other than that, I mean, he really, I don't think he gets the enormity of the situations until he has that breakdown and punches Ethan, because you see him standing at the sink just really having a lot of feelings about, what this will mean and what this will entail, that I don't know he'd fully processed until that point.
Yeah, he does seem to process things late, and he seems to not realize that things are hitting him in reality for a little while anyway. And then Gini is willing to play along and go with the flow. Like, she's sort of like Bill in that this is not really going to affect her day. Like, she doesn't get down under that desk until the nurse orders her to. She was just going to keep walking down the hallway because the whole thing is ridiculous. And she, I guess when worse comes to worse, she's willing to go along with it, but when it's at its absolute worst and it really comes down to the wire, because the fallout has already happened for her.
Right.
Like, there's only so much she can do to gather up her forces and try to keep it together. But she flees for higher ground at the end of the episode.
And I think that's very characteristic of her as well, because obviously when things are at their absolute worst for her, she's always ready to pull that ripcord and just deploy the parachute and get the hell out of there. You know, she did that with both of her marriages. She did that when her relationship with Ethan went bad. She's just always ready for that ultimate escape if necessary.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Then Jane is the little hall monitor. She's got her cool hat on. She's got her sign. She's got her book. She follows all the rules. But then she knows deep down, and I think she knows this the whole time, that none of this is going to save her. She doesn't have all the answers, and the book that she was reading on the beach is telling her the truth, that none of this is going to matter in the end anyway.
Well, and I really did like how that played out for her, especially in the scene with Lester, not only because I think they're adorable together, but just because it was a really nice moment for them both to be, you know, such rule-following people who are very appreciative of systems that are put in place, even when it means Jane is being, you know, some hall monitor and Lester is being made fun of by girls in the secretary pool who have nothing better to do with their days. You know, I think it's a nice realization that, okay, even though they're not exactly going to be like Bill or Virginia, just, you know, breaking strides left and right and forging these amazing trails, there's just enough of that spark in them to say, you know what, these rules don't work for me, so we'll just do something completely different.
Yeah. Margaret realizes pretty quickly that her options are limited, that divorce is not the ideal answer that maybe she kind of thought it was. And
I think she had a very romanticized version of it at first. Not like a Hollywood divorce, because obviously there wouldn't have been as much, you know, media about divorce available to people as there is now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she had this picture that, you know, once the so-called truth at that point of their marriage became clear, that, you know, Barton didn't desire her and she didn't want to be in that type of marriage, I think she just imagined that it would be this freeing thing and that everyone would see her as the wronged party, when in fact, you know, the conversation with her snipey little mahjong friends revealed the complete opposite. The husband strays, the wife pays.
I do think that, you know, rather than just sit and feel sorry for herself, Margaret goes out and tries to adapt. She goes out and you know, kind of watches at the bar and tries and sees the prostitute working and getting turned down and goes over there and starts asking questions. Like, that's a very brave step to take for a housewife who's been part of a system for a long time in the 1950s.
Oh, I agree. Just the fact that she had enough gumption to question the system that she'd been immersed in, raised to believe was the 100% right thing, that, you know, right there is why I love Margaret as a character.
And so then Austen, like we said, he's just totally in denial that any of this is even happening, and it catches up with him. And I think he's meant to be portrayed as having a kind of panic attack there when he rushes through the hospital, and there's lots of Dutch angles and slow-mo and people crying and, you know, faking crying, but it was a little silly. It came off as kind of, I don't think, quite as serious as maybe they intended for it to.
See, I actually thought that was purposeful, because it seemed twisted and silly in a kind of haunted house way to me. So, you know, here's Austen wandering through this stupid little simulation, people with fake blood and crying and, you know, the groaning, and, you know, you're not really supposed to be scared by it. It's obviously not real, but here he is, just because of his own personal biases, just completely having this moment where his head is exploding and he has to get out of there.
I think it's interesting how it's pregnancy that is the bomb dropped on this entire episode.
I think especially because I was imagining, because I hadn't read the biography before I saw this episode the first time, so when we got to this point in the season, I assumed it was either going to be, you know, this gesture of Bill in the last episode giving Jenny the money, which would completely blow up the study temporarily, or it would be something more conventional that we see in other shows, you know, Libby's pregnancy or interference from the hospital again. You know, I wasn't really prepared for it to be just, you know, some ordinary woman coming out of the shadows and being like, hey, remember me? Remember I was here 3 months ago? Yeah.
That was amazing. Bill has no idea. She says, I'm 3 months pregnant. Well, how long ago were you in the study? 3 months.
Get it together.
Get it together, doctor. Yeah. No, but I think it's 2 pregnancies that act as the atom bomb, because the first one went off at the end of the last episode. You know, Libby's pregnant, and it's layered. This episode is really layered. You get Libby's pregnancy affecting Bill and Ginny's relationship, their interactions with each other. Ginny doesn't find out until later. And then you have this pregnancy that's come out of the study. This is affecting, and it's like a sideways bar graph, and it keeps overlapping, and it's crazy that this is the way that they've constructed it, but it makes sense in a way.
Well, and I love that Bill spends so much of the episode punishing Ginny for some things that are her fault, but for a lot of shit that isn't. You know, that's really the only way that he can deal, is lashing out, even in subtle ways, like trying to undermine her in front of the patients.
Yeah, they came off like parents squabbling in front of their children.
Oh, God. I just loved those poor people were just sitting there. It was like a little tennis match, just back and forth and back and forth and back and, oh, God.
The lovely Anne, the lovely Anne Dudek.
I know.
Francine,
we love you.
Yeah, but everything was, like you said, an undermining power play to try to piss each other off, and they're kind of at this point where they sort of retreat into their corners and they go into sort of extreme reaction mode, really sticking to their guns on their, I guess what you could call their natural positions. Bill being super cold, logical, very by the book. Ginny being very humane to the point of, I don't know, I think she made some bad decisions. Not that she didn't have people's best interests at heart, but she did some things that could, in a different outcome of events, they could have had very bad consequences for the study as a whole, and I don't think she was taking the larger picture of the study itself into consideration when she hauled off and went to Austin and started telling people's names and phone numbers and addresses and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first was completely in the wrong, personally. Probably because, obviously, like you said, Bill and Ginny just have these diametrically opposed views on how to approach everything now that they're, not getting along. But especially in this particular instance, Bill is obsessed with the anonymity, maybe because he is tied to the study. He has participated in it, so he, obviously it is a very important thing to him having anonymity guaranteed no matter what, no matter the circumstances. But Ginny just got under my skin so much by going in there and essentially cowboying up, because I think you're supposed to see it as this maybe more sympathetic gesture, because she goes behind Bill's back and she has everyone's best interest at heart, and it seems like she's very sympathetic towards Flora and the whole situation, and in reality, like you said, she puts the study at real jeopardy. I think in the end it's good that Ginny did, give Flora money and that sort of thing, but as far as going to Austin and trying to guilt him into involvement, even though he's physically liable, obviously, but from a legal standpoint, not liable at all. I just thought that was bad form.
The fact that they've both retreated into these corners and they're approaching this from very they're approaching each other antagonistically and they're butting heads over this. I wonder if they had still been getting along, if they would have been able to meet in the middle and come up with a compromise. Come up with a compromise that would have helped other people's lives in a better, more substantial way. Because Ginny goes into this, like you said, she has Flora's best interests at heart and she sympathizes with her because she is also a single mother. She knows how hard it is. But at the same time, I still think part of her motivation was to get back at Bill.
Yeah, I agree. I think she was she wanted to be another instance where Robot Bill is wrong, Ginny is right because Ginny is better with people, and the fact that neither of them were able to take a step back and say, okay, here are the more practical solutions for this thing that has happened as a result of our study.
Yeah, she's not really looking, like I said, not really looking at the study itself long term, like the life of it. And this kind of hints at things that happened in the biography, like there could be lawsuits involved when it's revealed that certain people were involved in the study, certain people got pregnant from the study. This was, and this is a mean way to put it, this is kind of a low impact or a low danger version of it. But when you get bureaucrats, wives, and higher up people involved in it, like they've been implied to, that can have a much bigger impact. When it's unfortunately Flora is low on the societal ladder, when she's just a waitress, that doesn't give her much power to react against them. But they're not reacting well here. Like, there's no ideal solution here. So I worry that maybe they haven't learned the right lesson to have come out of this when the study is inevitably, as we know, back on.
I think, too, the fact that Bill shuts down so completely the conversation initially when Flora comes to him, and he's trying to figure out, what the hell she wants from him, and she's trying to tell him hesitantly, well, I got pregnant, I don't really want to be pregnant, I don't know what I'm going to do, and he says, if you've come to see me about an unwanted pregnancy, I don't do that, that's not something I can help you with. And either fortunately or unfortunately, the whole scenario plays out with Ginny giving money and things being maybe on shaky ground, but generally okay. Honestly, I keep thinking Bill is so well connected. He knows so many people. It probably would have been a much more compassionate approach to say, look, Flora, girl with no resources, what do you want to do about this unwanted pregnancy?
See, and I think that's his inability to confront what has happened to Flora parallels his inability to confront why he and Virginia are at loggerheads, because he has that line, we are not liable for any unintended consequences. And I think that could just as much mean pregnancy as it could mean an unwanted emotional attachment. So I think he's projecting his desperate desire to get the hell away from Virginia onto Flora.
And I think, too, it parallels, kind of interestingly, Ginny's assertions from last episode, oh, I didn't scratch you because I like you or because I desire you or, anything that would indicate their feelings of any sort. That was just involuntary. That was just muscle movement. That happens to people. And that, I think this is Bill's, the other side of the same coin, essentially.
Interesting. One thing that, and this is backtracking a little bit, this is so silly, but one thing that bothered me about the opening of the episode is that Bill didn't know how to organize the wires correctly.
Oh, see, that didn't bother me. I thought that was hilarious.
It was funny, but still, he attached them to Betty. How could he have forgotten how to attach EKG electrodes to people? He's a doctor.
Yeah, I loved that, though, because obviously Bill is so obsessed with being right and undermining Virginia's authority in front of the patients that he just fucks up something really simple. I thought that was hilarious.
What would you like to talk about now? We still have... Do you want to talk about Lillian?
Let's talk about Lillian.
Yeah, she's your favorite. I thought it was a charming little moment how Ginny, they're under the desk and Ginny says, well, charm goes a long way and you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And then she proceeds to prove her point and Lillian is totally taken in. Like, she has no idea that Ginny is literally, like, giving her a demonstration of this until Ginny says, see, there you go.
Yeah, I think in the business we call that getting Pete Campbelled. You're right. It was so... it was a little bit sad almost because here, these two characters have been struggling to find connection and really to understand each other. And so what you see, what is maybe supposed to look like this very elaborate olive branch, and then all of a sudden Ginny sort of rips down the curtain and goes, yeah, see what I did there? Do that with Fitzhugh.
I did like the pun that Ginny made, about wasps and his golf game, because she meant more along the lines of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but it worked well. I appreciated that.
Well, and I love that the way it plays out, that Lillian believing, charm and glamour means she has to get completely dolled up and put on her red lipstick and ask about his wife's handicap.
Oh, that was terrible.
Oh, God.
It was just awful. She went about it the worst way because she took it superficially. It was play acting, and I guess she was trying to imitate Ginny. She didn't take it on a level that she could have handled, but...
Well, and that's what was so funny about it, because, if this is Lillian's imitation of Ginny, like,
She's the
she apparently...
femme fatale vamp type.
Yeah, I love that. Femme fatale who maybe is obsessed with the color of people's ties and golf. I also like about this episode, and with Lillian and Ginny in that conversation under the desk, how it starts to lay down the track work for the Lillian versus Bill funding argument.
Ginny automatically started, even after everything that she's been through with Lily and all the struggles that she's been through to, try to meet each other in the middle, she still pipes up and says, well, don't worry, we'll get it funded.
Yeah, I especially like that even though there's no love lost between Ginny and Lillian, Virginia is still, I think Virginia, it speaks well of her that even amidst all the bullshit that she's going through with Bill and with the study and with, Ethan, it's nice that she's trying to put a good spin, a positive spin on Lillian's study, even though it's the letter that Lillian gets is essentially the university writing, "We don't care," in red letters.
Yeah, Ginny has boundless resources of not necessarily optimism, but just ability to suck it up and move on and keep going. She doesn't get brought down by the fact that, this whole thing has happened and that Bill is treating her like shit.
Yeah, I actually enjoy that, because it's nice to see someone not actively being spiteful towards other characters because of something that happened, 2 episodes ago or 10 minutes ago.
Mm. So let's talk about Ginny and Ethan now that you've mentioned them.
Does it come as a surprise to you, even knowing that Ginny and Ethan get back together, but just how quickly it becomes domestic for them and semi-serious? Because it always takes me aback, those first few scenes in the episode.
She did mention that it's been several weeks, and he still hasn't gotten what he calls sleepover privileges. So yeah, I am totally dismayed by the fact that he's inserted himself into her life so, I don't know what the word that I want is. He's just done it, like, almost behind her back. Like, not in a surprising way, but he's just sort of smoothly inculcated himself.
Yes.
In a just kind of a decisive, very quiet kind of way, and there he is on her bed. But I think what's fascinating about their conversation on the bed is that line about, well, I never asked about what you and Bill got up to in the study, and she responds by saying, our participation became complicated, which is the most loaded language. She and Bill would understand right off the bat that the word participation means out-and-out sex. But for Ethan, you don't know what he knows. Like, he obviously suspects that there was something. You don't know whether it's physical or emotional. You don't know what he knows, but he thinks there was something. And he keeps coming back to that. Like, he says, oh, well, don't worry. I won't ask any more about it. But when he and Bill get into that fight later on, it's the first thing that comes out of his mouth. It's on his mind constantly.
And I think, too, obviously Ethan is aware that something is happening and that it's bothering the hell out of him. Not only does he automatically jump to, well, there are feelings involved somehow, because he insinuates to Bill as much in that conversation, it's because I'm with Virginia, it's about Virginia. And so, in my mind, while the language that Ginny uses to describe that is almost the kind of language you would use to describe sort of a brief one-night stand, kind of quick affair, something that went horribly wrong and some mistake. Maybe to Ethan it sounds more like unrequited feelings of some sort, or just general weirdness.
I can see what you're saying. Like, he would perhaps assume that Bill made an inappropriate advance toward her and that it was one-sided. And that she turned him down, and then that's what created all this tension. Like, that would be a very classic thing to assume, I guess.
And, I think it kind of fits with the way he treats Jenny, because he really doesn't question her, like you said, on just exactly how things got complicated with Bill. Obviously, she sounds unhappy about it, but she's still with Ethan, so maybe he just assumes that something went really, really awkward, and, then when he has the opportunity to talk to Bill about it and rub it in, of course he's going to take that chance. It's Ethan.
When she says that Bill on a good day is hard to handle, that made me think of what happens way far in the future. There's kind of this theme throughout Ginny's life that she can't stop talking about Bill, that she is unable to let go of constantly talking about him, and especially kind of Monday morning quarterbacking. Because there are days when he's not so difficult, very rare ones, of course, but even Bill on a particularly good day, he's not out and out awful. She's not wrong to say, yeah, he's a bit of a shithead. But of course, she's got the narrow lenses of her own experience. But they tend to be colored sometimes, I think, in an odd way.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely, it's that bias of, well, you don't know how to handle Bill like I would know how to handle Bill. But at the same time, it's, Bill's a shithead, and he gets on my damn nerves all the time. It's that love-hate relationship.
Yeah, it's that deep complexity.
Yeah.
So speaking of Ethan, let's segue into Bill and Ethan's fight.
Woo!
Punch out. 1957.
I was honestly waiting for that to happen, because I think that was one of the clever things the show did this episode, was it just kept turning up that tension just barely, and then all of a sudden, Ethan makes that comment, is this about Virginia? And Bill's like, okay, clear the room, we're gonna fight.
I did like that conversation was so layered and carefully constructed.
Well, and I think it speaks a lot to that I would say half the internet assumed that they were talking about Ginny, and they were talking about, Ethan and Ginny's weird relationship, and not the more pressing matter of Libby's pregnancy and the fact that Ethan violated about half a dozen medical and moral codes just by doing that.
And Bill rewrites history a little bit. He had no idea that Libby was pregnant. Of course not.
Oh, no. He didn't know at all.
It reminds me of, and again, let's go back to Mad Men, Conley. It reminds me of Betty in season 2, where she and Dawn go out to dinner and she sees one of her old friends and she has no idea that Juanita is a call girl. And then she gets home and tells Francine, I recognized it right away.
Oh, yeah. She and Francine just get so much out of bringing that up and all the little things that, of course, they noticed. That's an interesting comparison because obviously Bill, not cut from that same cloth, but it is still that pride and that ego where, you can't admit that you weren't worldly enough to see this, or you weren't, for whatever reason, this thing eluded you. And so, of course, the next time you tell it, it's got to be, well, I saw it right away. I, wouldn't have missed that for the world.
And you really get a sense from Ethan's expressions throughout the conversation when Bill particularly when Bill says, did you think that I wouldn't know that with her sleeping next to me? Ethan just gets this look on his face like, oh, here it is. This is the confirmation. And then he's totally blindsided by the fact that it's about his wife.
Yeah, you can see Ethan just getting ready to be like, you fucked Virginia, and completely lose his temper, and then it comes up about Libby, and you can kind of see on Ethan's face, like, oh.
He just stumbles and is like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that whole thing.
Well, and it always cracks me up, Ethan's reasoning, too. It's just like, it is very childish, I like your wife. Your wife's a cool person. You should have gotten her pregnant. And just that completely unapologetic as to anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the scene is meant to play out like, you're very, I don't know. I wasn't really sympathetic toward either one of them when Bill started decking, just cold cocked him in the face. But then when Bill stands up and says, you have no idea what you've done, what you've gotten into, there's that element to his voice, the way he delivers the line that just puts you entirely on Bill's side.
And I think, too, it's interesting because you're not really supposed to be on Bill's side, I would say, as a general rule, because here you have this show and this episode is all about people stepping outside the boundaries and the rules and the different ways in which they can flaunt them and either get away with it or not get away with it and be impacted over it no matter what happens. But here you have, it's really this interesting reversal of tropes because, you're supposed to side with Libby and Ethan and their just amazing covert insistence on, Libby needs to have a baby. And
The Ocean's 11 aspect of it. You know, we'll meet down here in the pediatrics ward and no one will see us. And
yeah, it's supposed to be a coup. It's supposed to be this slick, sophisticated, defiant gesture, and instead it turns into Bill hunched over the sink, just like, you are a child, you have no idea what you've done. Not saying it in as many words, but basically a you ruined my life kind of sentiment.
At the very end of that scene, after Ethan leaves and Bill is hunched over the sink, there's a moment where he kind of turns his head and looks over his shoulder, and it makes you feel, like, uncomfortable to be watching it, because it's almost like he's turning around to look at the audience to check to see if they're still there watching him. And it's not a mistake. Like, it's not a mistake with the camera where Michael Sheen was checking to see if they were still rolling. Like, it feels very purposeful, but it's like, is anyone back there?
Well, and I think this is obviously the most public that any breakdown of Bill's has been, because clearly, I mean, he is typecast as the dispassionate robot for a reason, so any day in which he just hauls off, loses his shit, and punches his once very close colleague in the face, that's going to be a gossiped about day.
Yeah. What else do we need to hit on?
Let's talk about Margaret and the prostitute.
We kind of hit on this a little bit. I don't really have anything else to say other than, you know, that was funny in a sad way.
Well, I only really have one more point on Margaret other than her conversation there.
Go for it.
And that's the filmography of the scene when goes back to the house, because the way that they show her moving through Barton's empty room, it's really as if he's died, because, you know, she's just ghosting through this place where, you know, the man that she loved has been for so many years, and she doesn't really know what to do or how to react, and so she just gets on the bed with his robe and lays there. And that was very powerful work by Allison Janney, and I think that was more evocative of the nature of what had happened than any confrontation scene could have been.
It kind of extends the idea that her whole evolution into coming into understanding about him and what this means for their relationship and what this has meant for their relationship and what this means for her as a sexual human being, how that's changed her and how internalized it is and how unaware Barton is that this is going on.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously so removed from it, although in his conversation with Ethan where he is dressing Ethan down for being an asshole to Vivian, you know, everything that Barton says about, quote, Vivian's relationship with Ethan applies to his own marriage, because it's, you know, she's devastated, she wonders what she did wrong and how she failed you, and you can't even find your own ass, you're terrible. And
that's exactly what Barton is doing.
I just loved how on the nose that was. I didn't quite catch that on first viewing. I
did like, to briefly talk about Jane and Lester a little bit more, I did like that rather, like if this were if this were a show where a young popular girl turned on her weird nerdy friend in front of her normal secretary friends, you know, then the nerd would feel terrible about himself and, you know, would go without talking to her for several days before she comes up to make this big apology. He just kind of takes it in stride.
Yeah, he is really very strangely accepting about that whole thing, because clearly people making fun of him as he's not realizing, is nothing new, but I think the fact that Jane does come to him with an apology is really good enough to settle the issue in his mind, because, you know, not only is this someone who is big enough to say, look, I made a mistake, I was a jerk, but it's also someone who surprises him, because when he kisses her, she's pretty pleased about that. She doesn't go off and it doesn't become this entangled, weird thing.
He doesn't subject her to what we now call microaggressions the way Austen does, constantly pressuring her in weird little ways to be sexual and to be, you know, reminders, hey, we had sex once. Like, Lester is he just continues being Lester until he just comes out and says, you know, if it were my last night on Earth, I'd totally kiss you because you're awesome.
Yeah, I really liked that. That was one of the more unexpected parts of the season for me, and one of the things that I actually enjoyed the most was just that little weird relationship developing.
I don't think Helena York is going to be in too much of season 2. But I hope she comes back because she's awesome.
Yes. We need Jane.
I need Jane back. Do we have anything else?
I think it's interesting that Austen goes to see Margaret and, for once in his life, doesn't pressure her into anything sexual, that's not even on his mind. I think that was probably the most notable part of it.
Yeah, just coming together as kind of a connection. And it wasn't like a mother-son type thing. It was just two people coming together and talking and just hanging out.
Yeah, it was just a friendship almost.
Platonic ideal sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can make this episode short because we've got some freedom and independence to go deal with.
Okay, that is the end of Masters of Podcasting today. And as always, if you've got any questions or you want to send us an email, drop us an ask on Tumblr.
Thanks for listening.